Let's talk about one of the biggest security headaches out there: database passwords hiding inside our deployment pipelines. Today, we're going to completely solve that. We're building a truly passwordless CI CD pipeline for Azure SQL, which means we're going to rip out those secrets and automate access management right from the start.
So I've got a question for you. Are there secrets hiding in your pipeline right now? Come on, we've all done it. We've stored those database connection strings in Azure DevOps variable groups or maybe in GitHub secrets. And yeah, it feels kind of secure, but at the end of the day, it's still a static secret. It can be leaked, people forget about it, and it's a total pain to rotate. We're about to make that entire class of problem just disappear.
All right, let's break this down. Over on the left, you've got the old way: static passwords, constant worry, a real maintenance nightmare. But look to the right. This is the new way: dynamic identity. See, instead of giving our app a password that it has to carry around, we give the app an identity. The application literally proves who it is, and Azure SQL trusts it based on that proof. There are no secrets to manage. It's just a clean, secure, automated chain of trust.
So how in the world do we actually make this happen? Well, the key, the absolute cornerstone technology that unlocks this whole passwordless world is something called a managed identity.
Okay, so what is a managed identity? The best way to think about it is like a digital passport, but for your Azure resources. Microsoft Entra ID automatically handles it for you. So your web app, your Azure function, even your deployment pipeline itself gets its own official passport. It can then show this passport to other services like Azure SQL to prove who it is. And just like that, passwords become obsolete.
Now, before we jump into writing a bunch of code to automate this, it's really important that we understand the process manually. This is the logic our script is going to perform later on. Think of it as the foundational handshake between your app's new identity and the database.
This manual process is really just a simple three-step dance. First, you have to log into the database as a very special user, the Microsoft Entra administrator for that SQL server. Only this admin has the power to create users based on other Entra identities. Second, you create a database user, but you map it directly to your application's managed identity. And finally, step 3, you just grant that new user the permissions it needs, like reading or writing data. Let's see what that looks like in SQL.
And here it is. The real magic happens right there in that little phrase, "from external provider." That's the part that tells the database, hey, don't look for a password for this user. Its identity lives outside, over in Microsoft Entra ID. It's that simple. Once you've made that connection, you just add the user to your standard database roles. Our whole goal now is to figure out how to run this exact script automatically every single time we deploy.
All right, now for the fun part. We're going to take that manual SQL logic we just learned and wrap it up in a slick, reusable PowerShell script. This is the engine that's going to run inside any CI CD pipeline we want.
So the PowerShell script basically mimics what we just did by hand, but with a cool automated twist. First, the pipeline itself gets a temporary passport, what's called an access token, specifically for Azure SQL. Then, it just builds that same T-SQL query we just saw. And finally, this is the key. It runs that query against the database, but instead of using a password, it authenticates with that temporary access token.
Let's look at the first bit of code. This one line here, get-as access token, is where the pipeline proves its own identity. It's essentially saying, hey Azure, it's me. I'm a trusted service principal, and I need a token that gives me permission to talk to database.windows.net. Azure checks its credentials, and if everything looks good, it hands back a short-lived token. This token is our password replacement.
And this right here is the moment of truth. We're using the standard invoke SQL command that you've probably used before. But notice, there's no username, there's no password parameter. Instead, we use access token, and we just pass in that temporary token we got a second ago. This is it. This is how we execute a database command from our pipeline with absolutely zero passwords involved. Okay, so we have our awesome script. The last piece of the puzzle is to embed this logic right into our Azure DevOps YAML pipeline so it runs automatically on every single deployment.
For this job, the perfect tool is the Azure PowerShell @5 task. And the beautiful thing about this task is that it automatically uses your pipeline service connection to sign into Azure behind the scenes. That means the get-as access token command we saw, it just works. No extra login steps, no fuss.
And this is what it actually looks like inside your Azure Pipelines.yml file. You just define the task,
You point it to your Azure subscription, which is your service connection, and then right there in the inline block, you just paste in the PowerShell script we just built. Now, every single time this pipeline runs, it will automatically make sure your app's identity has the right permissions in the database.
Now, before you run off and implement this, hold on. There are a few absolutely critical things you need to have in place first. Getting these right from the start is going to save you a ton of troubleshooting headaches. Think of this as your pre-flight checklist for a successful launch.
This slide right here is your key to making this work smoothly. First, and this is non-negotiable, the identity that runs your pipeline, your service principal, must be set as the Entra ID admin on the SQL server. That's what gives it the power to create other users. Second, your app has to have its own managed identity enabled. I mean, that's the identity we're trying to grant access to, right? Third, your SQL firewall needs to be configured to allow other Azure services to connect. And finally, your pipeline service connection needs permissions to read from Entra ID so it can look up these identities. Get these 4 things right, and you'll be golden.
So there you have it. We've completely kicked database passwords out of our deployment pipeline. But you know, this pattern of using managed identities, it's not just for SQL. You can use this exact same approach for Azure Blob Storage, for Key Vault, for Service Bus, you name it. It really makes you start to think, what's the next secret you can hunt down and eliminate from your workflow? Thanks for joining me.